Chernobyl nuclear disaster, 1986. The meltdown at Chernobyl in April 1986 is infamous, but it all began with a seemingly small mistake during a safety test. Engineers disabled critical safety systems and ignored protocol, believing the reactor was stable. When they pressed the wrong sequence of buttons, a massive steam explosion tore through Reactor 4, releasing catastrophic amounts of radiation into the environment. Thousands were exposed, entire towns evacuated, and the long-term effects of radiation still haunt the region. One tiny procedural error triggered one of the worst technological disasters in history. The Challenger explosion, 1986. On January 28, 1986, the Challenger space shuttle broke apart just 73 seconds after launch, killing all 7 astronauts aboard. The disaster was traced back to the failure of an O-ring in the solid rocket booster. Engineers had warned that the O-ring could fail in the unusually cold weather that morning, but management ignored the risk. This tiny component, seemingly minor, became the epicenter of tragedy, demonstrating how small technical oversights can lead to massive loss of life. 3 Mile Island, 1979. The 3 Mile Island nuclear accident in Pennsylvania began with a minor malfunction in a non-nuclear component of the plant, a stuck valve. Operators misread the situation, turning the small problem into a partial reactor meltdown. While no immediate deaths occurred, the incident released radioactive gases and caused widespread fear. This disaster underscores how tiny operational errors, when combined with human misinterpretation, can escalate into near-catastrophic events. Deepwater Horizon oil spill, 2010. The Deepwater Horizon oil rig explosion in the Gulf of Mexico is often blamed on a small misjudgment in cementing procedures. The cement used to seal the well was unstable, and the sensors indicating pressure anomalies were ignored. When hydrocarbons surged through the rig, the result was a massive explosion and the largest marine oil spill in history. 11 workers died, and millions of gallons of oil devastated ecosystems. One small engineering oversight cascaded into environmental catastrophe. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapse, 1940. The collapse of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in Washington state is one of the most famous engineering failures. Built with a design that ignored certain aerodynamic factors, the bridge began to twist violently in wind conditions. A small miscalculation in its rigidity and aerodynamics caused resonance oscillations, eventually tearing the bridge apart. No one died. But the disaster remains a textbook example of how one tiny engineering oversight can have catastrophic structural consequences. Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster, 2011. The Fukushima disaster in Japan was triggered by a tiny underestimation of risk. The plant's seawall was built too low, and emergency protocols failed to account for a tsunami larger than the historical maximum. When the 9.0 magnitude earthquake struck, the ensuing waves disabled the cooling systems, leading to a nuclear meltdown. The small miscalculation in protective measures caused a disaster that displaced thousands, contaminated land, and left long-lasting environmental impacts. Mars Climate Orbiter, 1999. NASA's Mars Climate Orbiter was lost because of one tiny unit conversion error. Engineers in one team used imperial units, while others used metric units, causing the spacecraft to enter Mars's atmosphere at the wrong angle. The result? It disintegrated. A $125 million mission lost to a preventable mistake. This disaster highlights how even minuscule misalignments in communication and calculations can destroy billion-dollar projects. The Great Fire of London, 1666. The Great Fire of London began in a small bakery on Pudding Lane. A spark from the bakery's oven ignited flammable materials in a city full of wooden buildings. High winds fanned the flames, and the lack of effective firefighting infrastructure allowed the fire to spread. One tiny error, the failure to properly extinguish a single oven, led to the destruction of over 13,000 houses and transformed London forever. SpaceX Falcon 9 Amos 6 explosion 2016. The Amos 6 explosion occurred during routine fueling tests. Investigators determined that a small anomaly in the composite overwrapped pressure vessel, used to contain helium, triggered the catastrophic failure. The rocket, intended to launch a communications satellite, exploded on the launch pad, destroying millions of dollars of equipment. Once again, a minor technical oversight had major consequences. The Deepwater Horizon oil rig explosion, reinforced. A repeat mention is warranted because of how tiny the trigger was. The decision to replace a small pipe component with a less secure alternative allowed a blowout. This minor error in judgment, compounded by ignored warning signs and faulty pressure readings, exemplifies how tiny oversights can cascade into international disasters, affecting economies, ecosystems, and human lives. The Hindenburg Disaster, 1937. The Hindenburg airship exploded in New Jersey, killing 36 people. Investigators suggest a tiny static spark ignited leaking hydrogen, though multiple factors contributed. The disaster became symbolic of technological hubris, showing how one small misstep, ignoring safety protocols around a highly flammable gas, can obliterate a massive structure in seconds. Exxon Valdez oil spill, 1989. The Exxon Valdez disaster began with the tanker striking Bligh Reef in Alaska. The immediate cause? The captain failed to properly navigate around the reef, a seemingly small human error. The result was one of the largest oil spills in history, devastating marine life and local economies. Years of cleanup and litigation ensued, all stemming from a tiny navigational mistake. The Tenerife Airport Disaster, 1977. The Tenerife Airport Disaster is the deadliest aviation accident in history. Two Boeing 747s collided on the runway due to a combination of miscommunications, poor visibility, and one critical decision: a pilot initiated takeoff without full clearance. That small error caused 583 deaths and forever changed aviation safety regulations. Bhopal Gas Tragedy, 1984. The Bhopal disaster in India began with a tiny lapse in maintenance at a pesticide plant. A chemical reaction released methyl isocyanate gas into the air, exposing hundreds of thousands of people to toxic fumes. Over 3,000 died immediately, with thousands more suffering long-term effects. One overlooked valve or mismanaged chemical protocol had consequences that rippled for decades. The Boston Molasses Disaster, 1919. Even something as seemingly benign as molasses can be deadly. In Boston, a storage tank containing 2.3 million gallons of molasses burst due to poor construction and minor structural flaws. The wave of sticky syrup killed 21 people, injured over 150, and destroyed buildings. A minor engineering miscalculation turned a sweet industrial product into a lethal flood. Lessons in catastrophic tiny errors. Across technology, nature, and human society, these disasters share a common theme. The tiniest misstep can spiral into chaos. From nuclear meltdowns to oil spills, bridge collapses, and chemical leaks, history repeatedly shows how small human or technical errors magnify into catastrophic outcomes. The lesson is stark and unavoidable in complex systems. Attention to every detail is the difference between normal operations and disaster.